Good afternoon. Welcome to KAFEERO.tv. My name is Angela Mirembe and I'm here on Unpacked, and I'm so pleased to have Mr. Sibenaler here from UNFPA, the country representative of Uganda, and today we're going to talk about the demographic dividend. For some of you who might not know what we're talking about, stay tuned because I too just recently came to understand what this is all about. Elaine, it's so lovely to have you.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you for coming. I'm just going to dive straight into maybe how we met, and then you can give us a little brief of who you are before we dive in. I remember I met you at the Commonwealth Youth Meeting. I think it was a prelude to the event, and I saw you standing there and you were talking about the digital dividend, which caught my attention considering that KAFEERO Foundation were really all about digital skilling. But then you talked about the demographic dividend, and to be honest, I didn't quite understand what that was about. But when we came to the office and then we got some flyers, and then I started to realize, okay, demographic dividend about population and stuff like that, because I mean UNFPA is about the population fund. So then I started to realize, okay, 50% is under 15, and these were really just numbers to me. And then 80% under the age of 30. But what shocked me the most recently when I realized that from age 65 and above is about 2%. That was a bit shocking to me because I guess when you're growing up, you think that that age bracket is the majority because, you know, they run the nation and stuff like that. So I started to get interested and say, wow, Uganda is the second youngest country in the world, you know. And so from you, I understand there must be advantages to us being a really young nation, but there must be some disadvantages. I mean, for someone who's worked in UNFPA for I think it's over a decade in different areas of the world, what information can you pass on to the youth? Because this is not a conversation we have every day to sit down and discuss population. What for? Why do you think this area should catch our attention, if I can say that? Yeah, so maybe we can just start having a chat and you just briefly telling us about yourself, how you got into population and why.
Okay.
Yes.
So thank you again for having me. And I remember well the moment that you caught my attention when you spoke up in front of all of these decision makers, political decision makers and entrepreneurs, when you said that please also bear in mind that when you talk about entrepreneurship, you need to look at internet-based technologies and what that brings to young people and that it employs young people. I was not only agreeing with you, but I liked the way you stood up and very confidently brought the issue up. For me, and I'm looking here at your board, innovation is not bringing something new, but renewing something that is there. And that's what you did. You moved, you shifted the conversation from entrepreneurship to what I call the digital revolution.
Right.
And the digital revolution is what's happening around the world.
Yes.
And that's why we're sitting, right?
Yes.
On an afternoon when we can live stream through our Facebook and so forth.
Yes.
Now I believe that the digital revolution can harness digital dividends.
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely.
And you are best placed to see how that plays out, how you use IT and digital revolution for entrepreneurship, for employment, for empowerment, for education and so forth.
Yes.
Now, where the demographics come in is that you have in every single country around the world, when you look at the history of countries, a demographic transition. That means that countries slowly, as they evolve, have lower fertility, less children, and people are living longer. So you have lower mortality.
Yes.
And as that happens, there comes a moment when there is still a significant number of young people and of children in the population. So when you look at a population pyramid, it actually looks like a pyramid, right? And eventually so the youngest population gets smaller and so it becomes like a cone or like a cylinder.
Yeah.
But as that happens, that doesn't happen overnight.
Right, takes a while.
There is still at some point in the country's history a large number of young people
Yes.
and a large number of children and a small number of older people. That's
yes.
why you draw the attention to this 2%,
Yes,
right, of
yes.
over 65. Now, the dividend happens if a country takes the opportunity of that young population to look after its dependents,
Yes.
and that's young children, but also the
Older
older
people.
population,
Yeah.
and hence makes the investments and savings so that the population, as the population grows older, you have capital,
Yes.
you have savings, you have investments that benefit
The older
the
people.
whole population.
Yeah.
That dividend is not automatic. So the transition is automatic,
Right.
but for that to become
Happen.
a dividend is not automatic. That needs to be earned, and that needs to be earned when a country makes very, very deliberate investments in the education
Right.
of its young people,
Yes.
and especially in the education of its young women,
Yes.
health of young people and health of young women, especially reproductive health,
Yes.
and of course the job, labor and employment market. And among that you have vocational skills, etc. And
Yeah.
I think we will talk about
Yes,
that
definitely.
later. So that's how that linkage comes about,
Yes.
right? Now when you look at Uganda, we look here into this crowd, you look anywhere where you drive, you
Yes.
see that Uganda is a very young population. And as you correctly said, so it's almost 80% that of its population is lower than or
30.
younger than 30 years.
Yes.
So what does that mean? In our view, and in my personal view, it means that that is not a bad thing.
Yes.
If all these young people live up to their potential,
Yeah.
that means they have good education, they have good healthcare, they have information on how to manage their sexuality, and as they grow out of their sexuality, out of their puberty into young adults,
Yes.
and that there is a chance for these young people to find employment.
Well, you actually talked about something that I want to talk about. UNFPA is very involved in sexual reproductive health. That's one of your cores. And if they actually mention sexual reproductive health, some people will just be like, isn't that the basic information a child will get? It's you know, a sex talk. But is it more than that? And why
Yes.
should it be like a focal point? Why
Yes.
should it? Yeah, could you just shed some
Well,
light
it's
on
very
that?
simple. It's because we fundamentally believe that sexual and reproductive health
Right.
and are human rights.
Yes.
Right. So as
Okay.
you just said, everyone should have the right to know exactly what is happening in their body
Yes.
and what's happening as you start growing up, when you get into your puberty, when you have sexual relations
Yes.
or not,
Yes.
where you decide when to engage in those. And then, of course, as you know, sexual relations may lead to pregnancy. So to make a choice and to have the information of whether you want to be pregnant,
Yeah.
how many times and at what intervals.
Right.
Yes, so you're right, everyone should know about that, but not everyone does know
Yes,
about it,
true,
right?
true.
So not only does not everyone know about that basic functioning of their body, but they don't know how the opposite gender thinks or
Yes.
feels about the relationships that they may want to go into.
Right.
But they don't know, and women often don't know in Uganda, where to get
Help or
services
information, yes.
for what we call family planning, right? Now, whether that is contraception or abstinence
Right.
or other ways of sort of delaying a pregnancy, for us is fundamentally important. Why is it important? Because of two reasons. The first is that we believe that making that choice on whether you are sexually active is your first moment of empowerment.
Right.
That's the first time when you make a decision as a young adult,
Right.
even when you're still 12, 13, 14, what you do with your body,
Yes.
right? That's the first reason. So it's a fundamental aspect of empowerment and of living your right. The second thing is that 25% of all adolescent Ugandans, meaning below the age of 19,
Yeah.
25%, so 1/4,
Yeah.
has
Wow.
already had at least one child, right?
Wow.
So teenage pregnancies is something that is
Prevalent.
not right.
Yes.
we believe that you should not be a child having
A
children.
child, yes.
And so you should be able to stay in school and to build your future the way you want to build your future.
Yes.
Not by having to have the responsibilities of a mother,
Yeah.
which you may not be prepared for, neither physically, nor mentally, nor economically.
That's right.
So that's why this is important.
Okay. You mentioned how people should have the right, to delay pregnancy. Uganda's birth rate is quite high, 3% per year, which shocked me because it's projected that by 2040 we might actually be 80 million people. And it concerned me because when I look at the resources now and where we're going, and even when we dive into, you talked about education and skilling, and one of my questions was, do you think we're underutilizing our youth, even in terms of education? Because are they prepared? Because if we see the ratings of about 400,000 youths graduating every year, and then we have jobs which are less than maybe 10,000, but then our population continues to grow at 3%. Yeah.
Yes.
How might you have any ideas about how we could maybe prepare ourselves for the future, apart from SRH, but even the youth today, the skilling or getting employed? And are you able to just shed some light on that?
It's a very difficult question, and it's normally the questions that politicians are very happy to answer. You know that we are here, to support the government of Uganda and the population of Uganda in its own development path.
Yes.
Now, what you've just said is a fact that nobody will change and that nobody will take away.
Right.
And that fact is that the population of Uganda from now until 2040, right, which is when Uganda wants to be a middle-income country,
Yes.
is going to double. So it's going to move from almost 38 million to practically 80 million. And that is because of what you just said, the high
Birth rate,
growth rate of the population, right? So many countries have gone through similar experiences. But then what happened is that in those countries, and if you look at Asian countries or some countries of the Middle East or Latin America, their economic growth was extremely high. And it was even higher than, and much higher than the demographic growth. So that's the first thing.
Okay.
Now, is that going to happen or not? I'm not the Minister of Finance or of Economic Development, but that is something that the government needs to pay very close attention to.
Right.
The other thing, which is part of this, is that part of this equation is that the fertility rate is still very high.
Yes.
Over 5 children at average for every woman in reproductive age, right? So your family size is very large.
Yes.
Now, if you don't have the means to sustain your family, and you don't keep your children, you don't have the means to keep your children in school.
Yes.
You go into cycles or circles of that are vicious and negative, right?
Yes.
So it is important, first of all, that the government is aware and then addresses the issues. Now, the issues that you asked about young people, it would seem to me that yes, there is a large dichotomy between jobs that are available and the large number of Ugandans that come every year on the job market.
Right.
There is, I think, a dichotomy between what the school system can absorb and the 1.2 million children that are born every year and that are added to the population, of Ugandans.
Already.
So quality education is going to be very important.
Yes.
And then, of course, making that very, very important link between education and developing skills. Skills and competencies, on one hand, that cater for a competitive economy that is still rural or agriculture-based. And on the other hand, preparing young people, like you do here, for sort of entrepreneurship's minds. And of course, we can discuss this further down. But I do not see all of these policies and visions aligned.
Yeah.
Or if they are on paper, it's very difficult to put them into practice.
You mentioned the 2040 vision that we have for Uganda, which is basically to get our nation into the middle class or prosperous middle income. And it was started 2013. Would you say that there's some progress? Is there some progress that's taking place?
I'm the least placed to talk about progress because I've only been here for less than a year.
Yeah.
It's a difficult question, but what I can see is that number one, the division has determined the ideal size of family and of number of children, which is 4, which is already a nice statement to make that. The other one is that the women who are dying because they want to give birth is reducing. Mortality among children under 5 is reducing. Fertility rate is reducing. Access to family planning and modern methods of contraception is increasing. So those are good indicators,
strides, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But one of the real issues the country has, and that's not unusual, because all the neighboring countries have the same challenge, is inequality. Inequality and inequity, right? Between urban and rural, between men and women, between young and old. And that takes me to another topic, and you've mentioned, because you mentioned that all these people who are in power are at a certain age.
Yes.
And so for me, the biggest, most exciting opportunities for us at UNFPA is to bring the 3 generations of Ugandans together around the table and discuss policy, or discuss their outlook on policy.
Yeah, I think that would be very interesting. We're always having a debate in here where different generations, even just in the offices, they're struggling because you have what is termed as the Generation Zs, the kids who are about to enter the job market. Then you have the Gen Y, who is before the baby boomers. So you come into a company and the baby boomer is the CEO, but the Gen Z is working on Facebook, but the CEO doesn't quite understand because in his time that is. So I think it would be
that's
really.
Not the case in UNFPA.
That's you're hippie on Twitter, but I think that would sound great if all policy, if different age brackets could actually sit down and talk about these things, and that brings me to one thing like education. This could possibly even be just on your personal view. A lot of where we go, we hear, the education system, and you just mentioned now to make people relevant. Do you think Uganda should have more vocational skilling alongside, because all we hear is everyone's fighting to get into university, but also what we're starting to realize is they come out with a lot of theory, but when it comes down to practically doing some work, it falls through. So if I suggested something like, I believe it should be 50-50, university stroke vocational, or if after you finish university you at least take a year in vocational, do you think that could possibly help us with our unemployment issues and stuff like that?
I'm not an education expert, right? But it definitely makes sense to me. I think there's a number of things here to be considered. I do believe that a lot of countries that have made very quick progress in their education system and keeping children in school for as long as possible, right? Not only primary but secondary and tertiary, are those that have moved away from a memory-based knowledge system or knowledge education system to a more critical, creative, innovative curriculum where you learn, or sort of you acquire, you develop soft skills, emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, critical reasoning, versus performance that is based on knowledge and achieving high marks. So that's the first thing that for me seems to be fundamentally important. And within that, yes, everyone should be given the best possible sexuality education. According to their age, it should be appropriate, etc., etc. But then the other thing on vocational training, I think, is equally important. And so making sure that you have that balance
Yeah.
between the practicality and the knowledge that you're getting in
Yes,
terms of
yes,
theory,
yeah,
makes
there should be a
absolute
good-
sense to me. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that pretty much sums it up. We won't take too much of your time, but we really, really want to thank you for the highlights that you've given.
You're very welcome.
Would anyone like to have a question answered?
We have an audience.
Yes. It's okay.
Okay. Mine is just a question. What innovation, just a statement, what is that one innovation that you feel if someone made it for you, you would even feel you want to adopt that person? What is that one innovation?
I really like the question because I'm thinking about exactly this and what makes me as a leader want to adopt an innovation. It's not what I would like to adopt, it's who I would like to have in my team who can continuously innovate, right? So just two distinctions. One, innovate on what you actually have and making that more attractive, more attuned for bigger markets and more outreach, etc. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that we actually use what we already do and use that as entry points to think totally out of the box, right? So I really don't have, well, I have one opinion. I'm going to give you one example. But before that, I also have a strong opinion on innovations not being limited to young people. Older people, like me, or the younger old, can also have innovations, right? And they shouldn't all be IT-based. And it's going to be an interesting dynamic. How to use IT technologies for social change. So what is going to be socially interesting that doesn't make a profit, and what is now an innovation that you can actually sell and get a market for and get sponsorship for, etc. So that's a very important dynamic. But right here and now, when I ask my innovation colleagues, well, let's say the colleagues that are quite innovative or that are social change entrepreneurs, I put two challenges on the table. The first is that it is very strange to me that this country has continuous stockouts of medication. In the district hospital of Kanungu, or of a district that is in Karamoja. That's the first thing. So how do you prevent that? How do you prevent that whole forecasting, supply chain, to make sure that you don't have that? Especially because they are piled up in a central warehouse somewhere, right? That's the first thing. The second thing, for young women, and I really believe that much more can be done, is menstrual hygiene management. How do you approach that? It is unacceptable that a girl is not allowed to go to school because she doesn't have sanitary pads. A young girl who's 14, 15 years old, she misses 4 or 5 days of school because of that. Why? Because she can't afford, her family cannot afford to buy her sanitary pads. However, you have a multitude of young or sort of innovative approaches of reusable sanitary pads. How do we bring that to the market? How do we upscale? I think that would be two major innovations that I'd be very, very excited to hear about.
Okay, so I think we're out of questions. Elaine, I would really, really like to thank you for spending your afternoon with us here
Part
at
of my
KAFEERO here at KAFEERO.tv. And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you back next time. My name is Angie, and I was your host this afternoon. Have a good day.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you.